Another sensational week in the Sean Diddy Combs federal sex trafficking trial. We learned more about the freak-offs and some of the sex workers involved. Cassie's mom testified, and Kid Cudi even took the stand. And of course, I've got questions. Joining me to connect the dots as to what this all means for Diddy and the trial is my friend, entertainment lawyer, former litigator, and legal correspondent, Lisa Bonner. All right,
Hi, Carlos.
hello, Lisa. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as always.
All right, Lisa, let's cut through the noise. Last week, you said we're going to learn who will be in the courtroom in real time. And this week, we saw Cassie's mom, Kid Cudi, one of Diddy's former employees, or a couple of his former employees. What stood out to you this week versus last? What was your takeaway?
Well, this was a very interesting case in terms of the prosecution beginning to paint the picture of the RICO charge. So if we could just reset the room a little bit and talk about the RICO charge so all of the viewers understand what the RICO charge. I know because that was one of the biggest questions last week. Like it was very much focused on domestic violence and Cassie, and I kept saying that is a mere part of it to set the stage. And now we are starting to hear from the prosecution about the alleged RICO. So just again, to read from the racketeering count in the overview, the prosecution is charging Diddy and stating that he abused, threatened, coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and it attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, obstruction of justice. And they go on in the RICO charge to name other things such as possession of narcotics with the intent to distribute. We also talk, they just kind of laid it all out. So this week, as I read from the RICO charge, I think that you are starting to see, or the prosecution is really attempting to lay out and connect the dots about how he ran his company, what his employees did, who he relied on to carry out this criminal enterprise. So this is what the prosecution was doing this week, and versus last week, that's what I'm saying. Last week was a lot focused on just setting the stage with Cassie as she is victim number one.
Right. So how important are these testimonies as you lay out what's alleged in the RICO charges? How important are these testimonies and the people that we're hearing from?
Well, it's very important. So let's start with Cassie's mother. Cassie's mother was there to talk about and corroborate Cassie's story. The fact that she talked to her about wanting to leave and wanting to move and get away from Diddy. And she was a eyewitness to the abuse. She even had photographs, some of which we had not seen before. But I think the most important thing that we learned was the attempted alleged extortion of her, Sean asking for and demanding $20,000, or he was going to release the sex tape of Cassie. So her mother stated that she and her husband took out a loan, a home equity loan, in order to give Diddy the $20,000 that he had attempted or alleged to have extorted her. And then he paid it back a few days or a few weeks later. The paying back is not material. What is material in this instance is the extortion, which falls under other crimes in the RICO case.
So how damaging was her testimony to Diddy's case with that in mind?
I think it was very, in terms of starting, it's a jury question, but in terms of looking at it from a legal perspective, I think that she absolutely did some damage because, who else is closer to the mother but the daughter, right? And so the fact that Cassie had alleged these things and her mother was there from a firsthand perspective to corroborate her story with photographs. So that is powerful evidence. It's damning evidence. We also heard from some of Diddy's former assistants, two of them in particular, and one who was subpoenaed and given immunity in order to testify. Right. And the reason why the assistants are important is because they're alleging that he used his employees to carry out some of these criminal behaviors, which we heard that two of them were talking about that they carried large sums of cash for him. One of them was saying that he transported a gun for him, and he was in the car while they were riding around looking for Suge Knight, for example. And so a lot of the alleged behavior in terms of procuring drugs. So we heard a lot of what the prosecution was starting to allege in the indictment. And so I think the testimonies this week were very powerful in that, in terms of connecting those dots and building out their prosecution's case of alleged RICO.
Right. Well, Lisa, let's go back to Cassie's mom, Regina Ventura. They didn't cross-examine her. Why do you think the defense declined to cross-examine her?
Because what I said, the mother and the daughter, that is a very powerful relationship, no matter how you look at it. And so in those instances, it's, what can you say? No, this didn't happen. I mean, you're going to make yourself look like a pretty big jerk if you're trying to cross-examine somebody's mother about what the daughter said. And she had photographs to back it up. And she apparently had the receipts to back up the $20,000. And so she was there to round out Cassie's testimony, which she did. And I don't think that there would have been anything that the defense could have gained by trying to cross-examine her.
You mentioned the assistant. So Diddy's former assistant, George Kaplan, he talked about how part of his job was setting up the hotel stays for the freak-offs. But, you know, he was also kind of in awe of Diddy professionally. He kind of spoke about him as if he was some sort of like mentor, godlike figure. What did you make of his testimony, and how is it relevant to the RICO charges?
I thought his testimony was very powerful because, one, it showed his loyalty to Diddy, because he showed up and said, I don't want to be here. I was subpoenaed here. And then the judge, he was going to plead the fifth, and the judge absolutely gave him immunity. So what they were saying was, he was saying a few things in his testimony. He was stating that, one, he really learned a lot from this man. This guy was larger than life. He said, I just wanted to learn from him. So again, we are painting the prosecution is painting a picture of this mogul, right? This person who has this multifaceted business enterprise, who everybody wants to be in his orbit. I thought that was a very powerful statement from him. He also talked about the fact that he just did what he wanted to do. He worked these long hours, which in some instances, lends itself to the forced labor charges. He said that, I believe this was George Kaplan, or it could have been David James, the other assistants, that said, sometimes we worked 72 hours. We worked long hours. One assistant even passed out and had to go to the hospital to get rehydrated. Again, this goes to the point of forced labor. But in terms of his testimony, saying, look, I learned a lot from this guy. He's larger than life, and I did what I had to do to please him. So I thought his testimony was truthful. It came across truthful. It came across reluctant, but it also gave a very colorful picture, a very powerful picture of what it was like to work for Diddy.
So the week ended with makeup artist Mila Morales and Kid Cudi taking the stand. So let's start with Mila. So I actually interviewed her. I was her first interview last year, and she shared a story. I spoke with her for Extra, and she shared a story about an incident of hearing Diddy allegedly beating Cassie in a hotel room. And essentially, it's the exact same thing that she said on Stand.
Yeah.
I was already familiar with it because I interviewed her, and she did some subsequent interviews with some other outlets.
You were always scared of Puff. Like, he's a powerful person, and we don't know what would happen to us if we spoke out.
But how are these stories of abuse and the corroboration of abuse moving the needle?
Again, they want to reinforce the fact that that she was abused, for one, but forced by the fact that she really loved this man and kept going back, and that is why it was important that they brought in the psychologist who testified about the fact that, listen, it's typical for abused women to go back to them and talked about the power dynamic. So yes, she was there to testify. She wasn't on the on the stand very long. She was really there to reinforce Cassie's story that Cassie herself had brought up, again, to give credibility to Cassie's story. But it's important, again, that the prosecution steer the focus back to how this factors into it. It's not domestic violence. Remember, he is not being charged with domestic violence. This is to show force, fraud, or coercion as related to the sex trafficking charges as victim number one. But again, her testimony was quick, to the point, and corroborated exactly what Cassie had testified to last week.
Do you think moving forward that we're going to hear more and more about Cassie being abused and his physical violence against her, or do you think that's going to die down in the upcoming weeks?
It will probably, I would hope that it would die down. They might bring it up, periodically throughout the trial. They do have a victim number two that they have also charged with sex trafficking, who was a victim of the alleged sex trafficking. So I think at one point we'll move on to that. But again, you need to corroborate what Cassie said, because you want to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to the jurors that yes, she was in this domestic violence relationship that controlled her movements, that controlled her psyche. She was in a power dynamic, and that she really loved this man, because that is what Cassie said. Listen, all I wanted to do was please him, to spend time with him. And so I think that was important for those markers, but I don't think that they will continue if the prosecution, in my opinion, wants to, move the needle some more. They're going to need to really talk about the other charges. And I would anticipate that they would do that, because next week we're going to hear from people that were related to the Kid Cudi allegations that he stated in terms of breaking and entering and the alleged
and the car,
the arson. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about that actually, because Kid Cudi, we finally saw photographic proof that someone bombed his car, and he alleges it was Diddy, but we still haven't seen any evidence of that. So how relevant is his testimony?
Well, again, you're going to have a principal witness to come to the stand and set the stage, which is what he did. And so next week, you are going to hear from one of Diddy's associates that actually made the phone call, the alleged phone call to Kid Cudi, and said, hey, Diddy is in your house. So it is relevant in terms of, there is no eyewitness. There was no eyewitness to the alleged arson. There was no eyewitness to the alleged breaking and entering. But again, you have circumstantial evidence, and it is up to the prosecution to go ahead and establish what this man is saying is truth. Mm-hmm. And so I would assume that is what they will bring the former Combs employee to the stand to testify and to corroborate, yes, I made that phone call. And yes, so the jury, again, this is a question for the jury. Do you believe this man's testimony beyond a reasonable doubt enough to talk and convince you that this defendant is guilty of arson? And in the indictment, they mentioned that it is multiple acts of arson. And again, this is circumstantial evidence because there was no proof that anybody did it. But if you bring in enough people to corroborate the testimony, that means that they are trying to establish that this testimony is truthful, and he had reason to believe that. And that is what these backup witnesses are going to establish.
So right now, it sounds like these first couple of weeks, we're still setting the stage, and moving forward, we're going to hear, I'm assuming we're going to hear more witnesses to corroborate what we've been told over these past couple of weeks. Is that where this case is going, would you say?
Right. Well, you look at Cassie, when she came in to talk about her testimony, there were people that were brought in to corroborate: her mother, her best friend, Dawn Richard, the assistants had witnessed the abuse. Others had witnessed the abuse. So they have established that. And so they move on from that, right? And so what you would do now is move on to the next. We talked about Kid Cudi. All right. He is another principal witness because that is a charge in the indictment that he committed multiple acts of arson. So Kid Cudi said it, and now they will begin to bring in people to fill in and to broaden that inference. And what he is saying is allegedly true. Again, nobody saw it, so you need eyewitnesses to say, yes, I was there, I made that phone call. Because remember, when he got back to his house, there was nobody there. However, would you reasonably believe that somebody called called Kid Cudi and said, hey, Diddy is in your house? And then he calls Diddy, and Diddy allegedly says, yo, I would just want to talk to you. Okay, great, I'm on my way home. You get there, nobody is there, but somebody just told you that he was there. You get home, the security cameras are moved. Your dog is locked in the bathroom. Presents that you had wrapped for Christmas are open. So would a reasonable person believe that it was Diddy in the house, especially if after one of Diddy's employees, who they're going to bring to the stand next week, alleges that? It depends on what the person says, but that is what the prosecution has alleged. I'm assuming has interviewed this person and knows what he's going to say to establish that, to fill in, again, the doubts. And so each time you're going to have somebody, the principal witness, come on the stand, and they're going to bring other people in to establish that, yes, this person is telling the truth and this is what is happening. So they're building out a picture.
I see. So with that in mind, who do we need to hear from in the coming weeks? Who would you say that we need to hear from in the coming weeks?
That's a good question. You're going to hear from people that would be able to testify to the criminal enterprise, the forced labor. So I believe that they'll bring in people from the Combs Enterprises to talk about, yes, I worked to exhaustion. I passed out. Because a lot of this stuff, you don't want to get in the person's mind. Well, that's hearsay. Again, there are evidentiary rules around that, but that's what he said. Did this person pass out? Did this person witness? You're going to also hear, I would assume, from people that are higher up that were named in other civil complaints, such as his assistant, his former chief of staff, Ms. Karan, and I would assume, again, there was the Harvey Pierre, who was the president of Bad Boy Records, because both of those people are alleged of certain crimes and witness to certain crimes, or alleged to be involved in certain crimes in these civil cases. Again, a lot of this was built on these civil cases that were originally filed, not from the perspective of they're connecting these dots, but when the SDNY or the feds get involved, there is enough circumstantial evidence as they start to look into it. So that is what I'm assuming, that we'll continue to hear from security staff, household staff, people that were involved in these raids perhaps. And remember that we only saw that one house was raided. That was his Miami house. But you remember prior to that, a few hours prior to that, they had raided his Los Angeles house. We haven't heard of anybody, and we have not seen any of the evidence. So they're going to talk about that. What was found in that house? Were there more weapons found in there? Were there more drugs found in there? Those are the things that the prosecution is going to start to establish.
All right, so Lisa, it's still early, but based on the testimonies that we've heard and the damaging video that we've seen, Cassie in the hotel room and him pulling her back into the room, in the hallway rather, how likely is it that Diddy will take the stand?
It's highly unlikely that Diddy will take the stand. And I just want to remind people that just because a person does not take the stand, if you are a juror, that does not infer or imply that this person is guilty. That is one that's going to be in the jury instructions. That's clear across these criminal trials. However, the reason that he is not going to take the stand is because once you take the stand, everything that you have ever done related to any of these alleged crimes becomes fair game. And you are sworn in, and you are under oath for fear of perjury, and you can go to jail, to prison for perjury. So you want to avoid taking the stand for fear of self-incrimination. I just believe that they're considering this as the SDNY. I personally would believe that there is a lot of evidence that would be presented, even up until now, that I would not want to have to answer if I were Diddy. For example, did you drop the Molotov cocktail in this car, or did you have any involvement in that? were you standing in Kid Cudi's house at any time? He has to answer that if he were on the stand, truthfully. Yeah. And so now, if you don't take the stand, again, you look at what the defense has poked holes in terms of the allegations in the indictment, and you put everything together, all the evidence that the prosecution has presented over these past 8 weeks, you get jury instructions, and you are only to, as a juror, only to listen to what was instructed, what is in the transcript, and what is in the jury instructions. You not any outside noise, and how the law is framed, and you take all of that into consideration. And really, your instructions at that point are: do you believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant has committed these crimes? And that's it. So Diddy I would be absolutely surprised if he would take the stand. Defendants rarely do take the stand. There is nothing to gain, especially if you have any skeletons in your closet.
Well, Lisa Bonner connecting the dots. Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome, and thank you, Carlos, for this conversation.
Of course. All right, to stay up to date with all things Diddy Trial, visit us at page6.com and watch us on YouTube.